Is there something from your childhood you now look back on and think, but why? There's so many things about that time. I could probably do a whole series investigating things that seem logical or like absolute facts as a child, but now I'm like, what was that really about? Most of them come from stories told to me by family members or friends that left me traumatized, and others that I'm not sure if it was a false memory, a dream, or I actually experienced that. I recently remembered that the only reason I was never allowed to have a Tamagotchi was because kids had died because of it. Or at least that's what I thought. So now, as a 29-year-old lady, I was like, wait, was that a popular urban legend or was that a local thing? What was the real reason? And to be honest, this video kind of took a left turn and got away from me, because in finding out why I never got a Tamagotchi, I ended up in this rabbit hole of how Japanese media and products were received in my side of the world. For context, I live and was raised in South America, specifically Colombia, and this I think plays a role in everything I find out. So yeah, this is a very weird video that started just being about me investigating the reality behind the Tamagotchi suicide urban legend / creepypasta, and if this was the reason I never got one. But it brought up a lot of effed up stuff that serves as context to the real reason why. Since I didn't find specific data of this topic around Tamagotchi, I had to look at other similar stuff from the time to kind of connect it all and give it proper context. So some of the information might seem irrelevant at first, but believe me, it all makes sense in the end. And yes, I did find out the actual reason why I never got one. After presenting the findings to my mother, she told me why and why I wasn't expecting it. Unfortunately, it does not surprise me. Before I begin, a little disclaimer. All my sources will be linked down in the description as always. If I get anything wrong or I'm missing information, feel free to correct me or add to it in the comments nicely. I'm only human and I'm trying my best. In case you never heard of them, according to Wikipedia, Tamagotchi, which translates to egg watch, is a handheld digital pet that was created in Japan by Akihiro Yokoi of Wiz and Aki Maeda of Bandai. It was released in Japan by Bandai in 1996 and the rest of the world in 1997. Tamagotchi quickly became one of the biggest toy fads of the late 1990s and the early 2000s. As of 2017, over 82 million Tamagotchis have been sold worldwide. Most Tamagotchis are housed in a small egg-shaped computer with an interface consisting of 3 buttons. Essentially, they are keychain-sized virtual pet simulation games. The characters are based on animal, objects, or people, and they're colorful with simple designs. The big gimmick was that they were like real pets. You had to feed them and give them love. The Tamagotchi has an internal clock, meaning things like feeding them and keeping them happy were essential to keeping your little pet alive and well. And as a real pet, if you didn't take care of it properly, it could get sick and eventually die. They might also die of old age, and if they didn't leave any offspring, then that was it. Also, I read that apparently the death thing was mostly in Japan. They had ghosts and gravestones after their pet died. The English version was different though, or at least they eventually changed it. Basically, Tamagotchi pets were actually aliens, and so instead of saying they died, they would just return to their home planet. Which, gotta say, it's very much something I expect from Western adaptations. Anyways, the whole life cycle and system is way more complicated than that. So if you never had a Tamagotchi like me, I will leave links with more info in my sources. Okay, now let's talk about the urban legends about Tamagotchis I found, and then I'll compare what I remember hearing as a child, and also what older family members told me about it, since they were older and remember far more. I also asked on Instagram and got a few interesting responses. The thing about these stories I found on the internet is that, they are urban legends, obviously. I didn't find any actual victims with name and information about them, but even so, I'm not sure if these were the same stories that were spread when I was a child. So yeah, I'm just gonna tell you what I found out and I'll leave my sources. Just be aware that I have no idea where these stories actually started. Maybe because these were from a time where people didn't use the internet as they use now. I just want to clarify, I didn't find any actual evidence of deaths related to these stories, but if maybe you know something or you remember anything from those times, maybe you were older back then, please let us know. The most popular story I found was this one that is accompanied by a picture. It seems like a newspaper cutout from June 26, 1998, and it says, "Girl takes life after virtual pet dies." Now let me state from the start that there is no evidence that I could find that this is a real newspaper article. There's no name of a newspaper company and it looks pretty basic. Even if it were real, that doesn't make the story true. It wouldn't be the first time a newspaper published a fake story, and also, not all newspapers are a legitimate source of facts. Literally, anyone could have made that. The story is very short, but it says that this young girl hanged herself after her parents grounded her and took her Tamagotchi away. The pet ended up dying from neglect. Apparently, stories about people taking their own lives after losing their Tamagotchi started circulating. There is one about a lonely man who cut his wrist after the family line of his Tamagotchi ended after 4 generations. Another story says that a teenage boy took his own life after his psychiatrist gave him a Tamagotchi. The pet was meant to help him with depression since the boy was lonely. But yeah, none of these stories can be found anywhere. Editing Camps here, I just want to add that the reason I even maybe gave any credit to this when I started researching to see if there was this real story behind, it's because there's this thing called the Tamagotchi effect, and I'm just gonna read in Wikipedia what it is. The Tamagotchi effect is the development of emotional attachment with machines, robots, or software agents. It has been noticed that humans tend to attach emotionally to things which otherwise do not have any emotions. For example, there's an instance when people feel emotional about using their car keys or with virtual pets. It is more prominent in applications which reflect some aspect of human behavior or characteristics, especially levels of artificial intelligence and automated knowledge processing. And also, apparently, depression because a virtual friend or a Tamagotchi virtual pet died was a thing. Maybe it still is a thing. So I kind of gave credit to this story as being a possibility of why I never got a Tamagotchi, because I knew that this was a thing. And it was not only Tamagotchis as the thing says. It's for example, Furbies. Or, I don't know, does anyone remember those little, I think there was in the early 2000s, there was a big robot pet. I mean, there still is a big robot pet thing in the toy industry. But I remember there were Poochies and that little parrot that talked, because I had a parrot that talked and I had a Poochie. So, I don't know. It's just I think I know what's happening. That's why I kind of started there. But now I just don't know. So I just wanted to add that, why I started looking into this from this angle. It was not only because I remember hearing stories, but because I knew there was an actual problem, mental health problem surrounding virtual pets. So that's all I wanted to say. Thank you. Continuing with Fast Cams. Okay, thanks, bye. The only story about a Tamagotchi killing someone that I could find was this one from 1998 France. Apparently, a 27-year-old driver in, I'm gonna mispronounce this, Marseille, France, my French teacher would kill me, got distracted by her Tamagotchi and she plowed into a group of cyclists, killing one and injuring another. So yeah, that's all I have on this. As I said, not a lot of information online, and most of it all links to the same article. The stories I remember from my childhood were a bit different though, more supernatural in nature, and yes, they came from my evangelical friends, but I have family members and friends that also remember hearing similar stories. Apparently, if you didn't take care of your little pet and the pet died, the user will die too. That's what it boils down to. A person just having a soul bond or something with their little Tamagotchi pet. Now that you know what I found on the internet about the Tamagotchi suicide and a little bit of what I remember, I want to tell you the background of everything that led to the reason I, and maybe many other kids, didn't get one. The reason I decided to go through this ride is because the urban legends weren't really it. At first I thought it was because of some weird fake stories, but the more I read and talked to other people who remember this, the more I started to realize they went in a whole different direction. That might be connected in a way to the urban legends I mentioned previously, but I think it's more of a growing up religious thing. You'll see what I mean. Growing up, this kind of urban legends about toys and kids media wasn't rare where I lived. Probably the biggest example of this was when I was in 2nd grade, Pokemon toys got banned because they were diabolical or something like that. From what I've been told by people that remember back then, it all stemmed off from that banned episode from the Pokemon series called Computer Warrior Porygon. There was a scene 20 minutes into the episode where red and blue light flashed very intensely. These flashes were bright strobe lights that blinked at a rate of about 12 Hz for approximately 6 seconds. Some viewers experienced blurred visions, headache, dizziness, and nausea, while others suffer seizures, blindness, convulsions, and loss of consciousness. Japan's fire defense reported that 685 viewers were taken to hospitals because of this. Most of the victims recovered in the ambulance trip, but 150 were admitted in the hospital. More people had seizures in later rebroadcasts of it on the news. The incident is referred to as the Pokemon shock. There's tons of video about this incident here on YouTube if you want to learn more about it. You can also find the Pokemon episode online, but I would recommend proceeding with caution. I know of someone who didn't know they were photosensitive to strobe lights until they watched the episode out of curiosity and got nausea and a bad headache from it. The good thing though was that it made them go to the doctor for a checkup and found out they had a disorder. So I guess kind of a win for them, but please be careful anyways. So this next bit of info you have to take with a grain of salt because it's from a teacher who was teaching at the time in my city. It does make sense and they are, in my opinion, a credible source, but it's anecdotal evidence after all, and there's definitely more to it than just this, and I will eventually get to it. Basically, the information about the Porygon episode reached my country, but it was very broken. There was no social media back then, so the info did not spread as fast. Apparently, some evangelicals got a hold of this story, and let me tell you, one of my best friends was evangelical when I was a kid, and they have all kinds of twisted stories about evil toys from popular franchises. Can't tell you how many times I laid in bed awake at night in fear that my Barbies were gonna murder me. But anyways, they basically spread the story that Pokemon cause seizures, and seizures are linked to demonic possession, so you can see where this is going. In essence, they didn't relate the seizures to a specific episode, they related it to the whole franchise. If you play with Pokemon toys, Pokemon cards, if you watch the show, you could get seizures. I was a big Pokemon fan back then, and one day my parents got a letter from school saying Pokemon products were banned. We used to take our little Pokemon figures to school to play. No more. Now it seems like they weren't super specific in the letter as to why they were banned, although it might have just been because they were distractions. The thing is, why Pokemon specifically? Technically, any toy from any brand or franchise is a distraction from class. But the letters were very specific saying Pokemon toys. I tried googling anything pre-2016 before Pokemon Go came out, cause that was all the results I was getting, and there's nothing specific. I did find a lot of good old Pokemon are satanic and corrupting children, which in essence is what I think the reason was. And I'm not saying this out of nowhere. This was a very popular narrative for years even today. If you connect it to what my teacher mentioned about seizures being caused by the devil, it all makes sense, doesn't it? Pokemon was a danger to children according to evangelical pastors, and it wouldn't surprise me if they were using this episode to justify themselves. I don't know how schools are in other places, but here, and specifically back then, almost all schools were deeply religious. My school was technically not a Catholic school, but we were forced to go to Mass and we had religion class, which was only Catholic religion. There were many evangelical kids in school anyways that didn't exactly participate in it, they were just kind of there. And I don't mean to generalize, but evangelical parents tend to be the loudest when it comes to this kind of things. So no. It wouldn't surprise me if a bunch of evangelicals came to my school's principal and were like, Pokemon is the devil, ban it. And she felt pressure to do it and maybe even low-key believed it was true. This is alleged, I'm speculating, I don't know if this is true. It wasn't just that. The amount of shit I heard as a child about how Pokemon was from the devil, I specifically remember two things. One, that you know Pikachu's cute little ears? No, those represent the devil's horn. The other one was super wild thinking about it now. When Ash does his little I'm gonna throw a Pokeball thing, well apparently when his hands are off screen he does the devil sign, which is this hand sign. Do they know that Ash is a cartoon and not a real person? If his hands are off screen, I'm sure nobody bothered to animate his hands at all. And it was not only Pokemon, basically everything that is popular becomes satanic to some evangelical preacher. I don't know if you guys remember, only a few years ago there was one saying fidget spinners were satanic and the devil's toy. Even Harry Potter is considered satanic to them. This is all to say, the panorama for 90s toys and media in my city was very strange and very religious for some reason. I wasn't raised an evangelical, but a lot of their beliefs did spread wild over here until my closest friends were raised evangelical. I could make a whole video of the fucked up things they told me, some really gory stuff, and we were like 8. As I mentioned, I asked on Instagram about this whole thing and I got a few replies from locals. They heard similar stories to mine and also the one with the girl I talked about previously. One of them actually mentioned how she went to super religious nun school, where things like Tamagotchis were banned because, once again, the devil was in them. This was Catholic school. Some Catholics are way more extreme than others, so I'm not surprised. Then someone pointed out something I hadn't quite connected until this point, and that is that back then there was a big stigma around Japanese products. Animes that were popular back then, like Pokemon, Dragon Ball, Doraemon, Sailor Moon, all had a very negative reputation. And I do remember this being a huge thing. I remember people calling anime in general muñequitos diabólicos, aka devil cartoons. So I asked family members who were into anime and teenagers back then, and yeah, that was definitely a thing, and also part of the appeal to some kids like them. And before anyone says anything, yeah, I know that things like Harry Potter were considered satanic and they're not Japanese. There's tons of things that are not. But the difference is that the reason something like Harry Potter was deemed satanic was because it dealt with witchcraft. It's very different than saying everything from the UK is satanic and that's what was happening here. Something from Japan doesn't have to explicitly deal with things like witchcraft, but they will relate it to it just because it came from that country. I'll give you an example of this. Just Google things like Dragon Ball Z satanic and you'll find article after article talking about satanic messages and witchcraft in the show. For example, this article from 2005 about subliminal message in the show that says, Kamehameha is a key word that Chinese witches use in satanic rites to feel the presence of Satan in their lives and acquire power. In reality, Kamehameha means absolutely nothing in Japanese. Yes, I know they said Chinese, but I think it's because of this whole racist idea that all East Asia is the same, or they are all Chinese. In reality, it's a pun of the name of the Hawaiian king Kamehameha I, coupled with the Japanese words for turtle, kame, because Master Roshi is also known as a turtle hermit, and ha that means wave. And this is an article in Televisa, which is a huge Mexican media company. They literally made up a whole meaning to something that is just a pun. There's a big difference. At least in Harry Potter you can make the terrible argument that they are wizards, so Satan. But Dragon Ball doesn't have witches. Well, it does, but not in the context we're talking about right now. Then one of my close friends reminded me of this video that was super popular one time. I'm not actually gonna put it because it's in Spanish. I will leave a link in the description. But this guy, an evangelical pastor, just outright states that anything that comes out of Japan is satanic. So yeah, actual confirmation that this is a thing. And it's effed up, but I embarked on this journey trying to find out the fake story that made it so I never got a freaking Tamagotchi. And the answer was racism. I never got a Tamagotchi because a group of people decided that everything that came from a country with a culture and beliefs different from them was bad. Yeah. Now, this is absurd, but my parents kind of believed it. Mostly my mom. I don't know about my dad. But after coming to her after finishing my research and asking her, she told me that it's true. She was told they were satanic and that's why she didn't buy one for me. She didn't want to tell me before because she felt ridiculous for believing in that before. And she now thinks that all of that kind of stuff is BS. But yeah, now I know and I don't know how to feel about it. So that's it. The reason I never got a Tamagotchi was because they're a Japanese product. Not because of an old urban legend or anything like that. It was just because of terrible people spreading their terrible ideas. What can I say? What started as me making a video about what I thought was going to be a deep dive into an old urban legend and its origins turned out being just about how Japanese products were viewed here in the 90s and early 2000s. And what saddens me is that yes, things have changed to a degree. Anime and Japanese products have become more mainstream and widely accepted. I can even go to a mall and go to a Japanese franchise store and buy products from there. But that's only a small part of the problem. There's still a huge problem of how Asians are perceived and treated. We still to this day have to tell people to not generalize East Asians. I still hear people refer to Asian women as exotic or refer to their eating habits as disgusting. There's also a huge issue of infantilization of Asian women. Asian people are still victims of targeted violence. It's not a thing of the past, and because of that, I will leave some sources in the description about anti-Asian violence and what you can do to stop Asian hate. It's sad to think that something you saw as insignificant in your childhood has such a nasty background too, and the only reason we didn't know about it is because it didn't affect us directly. Yeah, I didn't get a Tamagotchi. Big whoop. I can't imagine what it must have been like to be Japanese or just East Asian in general in this time, and live in a country that spread this kind of narrative around. And I don't care if someone says I'm being disrespectful, but all the pastors that help spread this narrative. There's a reason I have always had a contempt for evangelical pastor. Well, there's many reasons, but specifically for being trash human beings and making up lies like this. I didn't think this is how the video was going to end, but at least I hope I can bring some awareness to this problem if anything. Oof. This video got a little heavy towards the end, but I'm just a little pissed. Hopefully this video was not too confusing since I had to basically reorganize it and shape the narrative of it, the more information or lack thereof I found. I would like to hear if you have any experience with anything like this as well. I'll be back next time with an art related video that hopefully takes way less time to research than this one. Stemming off from this, I would like to do more videos about things about my childhood that now looking back as an adult, I'm like, what was that? If you enjoyed this video, make sure to like it, and if you're new, make sure you subscribe. I can't even tell you what I do videos on these days because I don't even know. But sometimes they're mostly art and internet related, so hang out with us if you want. I also stream on Twitch if you want to see the speed paints done in real time. That's where you should go, and sometimes I play video games too. If you have any suggestions for topics, you can leave them here or any social media I have on the description. So be sure to check those out for that and updates about videos and art stuff. Thank you for watching. Special thanks to my patrons who somehow stick around even with the lack of content these past few months. And I'm pretty sure this is getting demonetized, so I appreciate it more than ever. And yeah, see you next time. Have a good day, good night, and good fight. Bye.